In order to solve your leadership shortage, the starting point is to think like a leader or think like a servant. Once we think like a leader, then we learn how to act like a leader, build a team, lead a team, trust your team. And now we get to a vital part, but often ignored part of leadership development and becoming a great leader, and that is learning how to listen like a leader. Remember, with every aspect of leadership, there's a heart issue and there's a skill issue. And it's certainly true with listening. We have to have a heart to listen. We have to have a humility to want to listen. But there are also some skills involved in listening. There's some discipline. There's getting rid of the distractions, cutting the phone off and silencing the phone and focusing. There's also posture and leaning into the person that you're trying to listen to. We need to listen to our leaders. We need to listen to our followers. We need to listen to our peers and our friends. If you're married, you need to listen to your spouse. As our children get older, we need to listen to our children. And you know what? We also need to listen to our critics. In Acts 6, there were some critics, there were some complaints about what was going on in the church. And the apostles were wise enough and secure enough to actually listen to the complaints and not just dismiss them and say, well, that's just a bad attitude and just throwing out every time there's a complaint. They listened and they came up with a solution for a real problem. And that solution mobilized more leaders. That solution solved social needs. When I was new in ministry, I was always seeking out spiritual fathers, a generation ahead of me, to try to learn from their wisdom, to kind of look over my shoulder and make sure I wasn't repeating the same mistakes. And I'm thankful for the spiritual fathers and leaders that really helped me. It seems like the older I get, I'm doing the opposite. I have my peers, they're all old guys like me, but I'm also now reaching back to a younger generation to get a different perspective and to find some ideas that I would have never thought of and my generation would have never thought of. So I think the multi-generational conversation is so vital for leaders. If you're the young guy on the campus, then it's reaching to older people to get input. If you're an old guy like me, or actually middle-aged like me, then it's reaching back to the young people so that we get a full perspective of the options and the decisions we have to make. And again, we're ultimately trying to seek the wisdom of God. I recall a conversation with a pastor one time, and he was sort of wrestling with the idea of the tension between hearing God and hearing people. And here was the question he asked me. He said, Steve, what do you do when you've heard from God, you've listened to God, but no one on the team agrees? I said, well, that's easy. I just admit that I haven't heard from God, and I go back to the drawing board. He goes, no, you don't understand. He goes, when you know you've heard from God and no one agrees. And I said, the same answer. Well, I just realized that I haven't heard from God. I'm not sure we ever concluded that conversation, but I realized that if I am the only one who thinks I've heard from God, I probably haven't. I probably need to process and work with the people around me and work with my leaders and my friends and my peers and my team. That doesn't mean you're not leading your team, but in learning to listen to people, we're really trying to hear God. When it comes to leaders who listen, there are a lot of lessons in 2 Chronicles 10, the story of Rehoboam. The people came to him and they said, look, your father made it really tough for us. And if you would lighten the load, you would create some loyal servants for life. Now, here's what was good about that. Rehoboam had the kind of leadership culture where people felt like they could come and talk to him as a leader, and they could bring their ideas, and they could bring even things they didn't agree with and some suggestions. And then he went to the old men, the wise seasoned leaders. That's step number 2. That was a good move. And they said, you know what? That's right. Let's bring some grace, and let's just learn to relax, and let's not make it so tough. That was good. He had an open forum. He went to the wise old dudes, but then he went to his peers, the young, inexperienced leaders, and they gave him the opposite counsel. So he rejected the wisdom of the old guys, and he went with his buddies. And it turned out to be a tragic, disastrous leadership decision. Who we listen to matters, that we have an open culture where people can talk to us, but ultimately we've got to figure out who has the wisdom of God. In order to be a good leader, we have to learn to be good listeners. That has to do with the heart, and it has to do with skills. I think the starting point really is the heart, that we realize we're not always right. We don't always have the best ideas. Therefore, as leaders, we have to listen. We have to create a culture of conversation. We have to have some trusted allies who will speak the truth, and they'll feel free to disagree with us and to have a good conversation about that, because ultimately we're after God's will. Every leader, the goal is that we hear and discern God's will, but we need to have the people around us to help us do that. If you want to listen like a leader, first thing you have to do is just relax. Okay. All right. Okay.